Humans are responsible for virtually all global heating over the last 200 years. The climate time bomb is ticking. Our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once.
The latest UN climate report is once again sounding the alarm, but it comes with a message of hope. We'll speak with the Canadian climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe about how she believes we have the tools at our disposal to address this crisis now, and we'll talk about how to get through to people who perhaps think otherwise. That's coming up in about 90 seconds. I'm Matt Galloway. You're listening to The Current on CBC Radio and the CBC Listen app. Stick around. Hello again, I'm Matt Galloway, and you're listening to The Current.
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. The climate time bomb is ticking.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was blunt, as always. He spoke at the release of the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report yesterday, and in it, scientists signal that this is the final warning to act on climate change. Katharine Hayhoe is a Canadian climate scientist, professor in the Department of Political Science at Texas Tech University, and the chief scientist for Nature United, a land and water protection group. Katharine, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Matt.
It's great to have you back on the program, as always. The language in this report speaks of time bombs and final warnings. From your perspective, how dire is the climate crisis right now, and how urgent is this warning?
It is completely justified, and I want to be clear, it's not about saving the planet. The planet itself will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It is about saving us humans, our civilization, and most of the living things that share this planet with us. That's what's at stake.
And so what's different now than from the last reports, which had, as I said, similarly not apocalyptic, but language that reminds people that this is a crisis, an existential crisis. What's different now? What's
different now is we're much closer to that, and the window of time that we have to take meaningful action to avert the worst consequences is closing quickly. We scientists have been warning people of the impacts of this issue since before I was born. We've known since the 1800s that digging up and burning coal and gas and oil is producing heat-trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. And today we can see that evidence with our own eyes. It is no longer a future issue. It's happening right here, our heat waves, our wildfires, our floods. It's also affecting our food, our water, our health, the safety of our homes, our infrastructure, our economy, our supply chains, all of the living things, again, who share this home with us. We are all being affected today, and that's why this is urgent. Climate change stands between every one of us and a better future.
You said that on Twitter, that climate change stands between us and a better future, but you also said many of the solutions are already at hand. What are we waiting for? What are the solutions? In some ways we know this, but it seems as though we're not acting on it. What are the solutions that are in front of us?
We aren't acting for a couple of reasons. One is we still suffer from psychological distance. We still see this as a faraway issue when actually it's right here in front of us. But the other issue is that we don't know what the solutions are. We think, well, that's, if somebody's a CEO or they're the prime minister, or there's somebody in charge of things, they can worry about it. But what do I have to do with the solutions? The reality is we all have something to contribute. We all live somewhere. We all work somewhere. We might study somewhere. We might belong to an organization. And how does any change happen? It happens when somebody advocates for that change and catalyzes it and says, why don't we do something different? So what do those changes look like? Well, if you think of the atmosphere, like the above-ground swimming pool I grew up with in Etobicoke, where my toes just touched the ground, so I was safe there. But that swimming pool is like the atmosphere. The level of water is like our heat-trapping gases. And at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we stuck a giant hose in the swimming pool, and we've been turning it up every year. We have to turn the hose off through efficiency and clean energy. But that swimming pool has a drain. We have to make the drain bigger to take our carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's investing in nature. And we also have to learn how to swim. That's climate resilience, because our toes don't touch the bottom anymore.
That goes to the second part of this, which is what are we waiting for? The chair of the IPCC said that we're walking when we should be sprinting. Is it realistic to speed up the efforts that we might be making, meager as some people might see them now, but is it realistic to speed those up to deal with the onrushing reality that this report presents?
Well, we are certainly already taking action. So we have a price on carbon. We are investing in climate resilience. We are already moving in the right direction, but we definitely have to do more. How much more? As much as possible. How much? As soon as possible. Why? Because as the IPCC concludes, every bit of warming that we can avert through our actions saves us from suffering.
But what is realistic when it comes to those actions? We'll hear from people who perhaps have a vested interest in this, who will say the world still relies on fossil fuels. There's a huge portion of the world that still relies on fossil fuels. To pretend otherwise is denying reality for those who don't have the option to get off of oil and gas just yet. So what is actually realistic, do you think?
Mm-hmm. So the United Nations and the International Energy Agency have both developed scenarios of how we can quickly transition to net zero. There's no magic switch that we can flip tomorrow, turning off all our fossil fuel use, as you point out. But there is a way to accelerate this transition. And in fact, the International Energy Agency projects that by 2025, with today's policies, renewable energy will be the most significant source of electricity around the world because of falling costs as well as climate policies. So again, we're already heading in that direction, but if we can accelerate it, we will reap the benefits because again, it's us that's at risk. And fossil fuels have brought us tremendous benefits. I mean, imagine what our lives would be like without energy, without electricity, without transportation. But just as we no longer depend on formula and baby food, in the same way, we have to move beyond what was good for us in the past because today we realize that remaining addicted to those fossil fuels today in the year 2023 carries a price tag that we cannot pay.
What would you ask of Canada in that fight?
Several things. First of all, we need to do more. We are already heading in the right direction, but we need to do more and we need to do it faster. Second of all, we need to influence others to join us, and many are already there, but many more need to come faster. And as individuals, there's so much we can do because how does a system change? It changes only when individuals within that system call for change. Again, we all live somewhere. Most of us work somewhere. We might study somewhere. We might be part of an organization or a group. And when we talk about why this matters to us here and now, when we connect our head to our hearts, and when we connect our heart to our hand, when we talk about what we can do to make a difference together, that's when change starts to happen. And we need that change at every level, from that of the individual all the way up to the entire human civilization on this planet.
I'll come back to the individual in a moment, but again, in this country where oil and gas, particularly in parts of Western Canada, is still such a huge driver of the economy in those communities, would you want to see a moratorium on new development? Would you want what would you want to see from a country that you know so well when it comes to addressing that part of the energy mix in this country?
Well, first of all, what the science says is that new oil and gas development is incompatible with our Paris targets. That's what the science says. We already have access to enough carbon in the ground that if we burn it, we can pass that target. And if we develop more, we will definitely pass that target. But at the same time, we have to absolutely invest in a just transition. A just transition means that there are people whose jobs, whose ability to put food on the table for their families depends on the oil and gas industry. And those people did not, willingly make the choice to say, well, I'm going to, work in this industry, even though it's producing all these heat trapping gases that are causing climate change and may eventually end civilization. They are doing it because that's the only option they have. And for those communities, we need other options. We need green jobs, we need clean jobs, and that investment's already happening, but it needs to happen more at every level. We also know, though, that in Canada, the oil industry has significantly invested in delaying climate action. There's a really interesting book by a Canadian journalist called The Petroleum Papers, just came out this past year, and in it describes how oil companies studied carbon pricing 30 years ago, concluded that it would rapidly reduce Canada's carbon emissions, and decided to actively lobby against it.
And so back to the individual. If people feel as though they hear about this report, they hear that language, and they either think, well, I've heard this before, or it's all too difficult and I don't know what to do about it. You and I have spoken a lot about how do you reach people. How would you reach those people who pull back at that language, but also pull back at the scale of the effort that's going to be needed to address the crisis?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if people did pull back, because fear often paralyzes us. It causes us to freeze rather than take action, especially the type of action that requires much more sustained investment. It's not about running away from the bear. It's about changing the entire foundation of our society as quickly as possible in order to ensure our own survival. And that doesn't just take fear, that takes hope. And what is hope? Hope is not, oh, if I just bury my head in the sand, everything will be fine. If we do that, no, it will not be fine. Real hope is the fact that if we do something, we are convinced that it can make a difference. We're convinced that there is a better future possible if we do everything we can to get there. And the science supports that. The science shows, and this IPCC report shows, that the solutions are at hand and our choices matter. In fact, literally, the report says, every bit of warming matters, every action matters, every choice matters. The power is in our hands to ensure a different future. And the good news is that many of these solutions carry benefits today as well as for the climate tomorrow. So, for example, burning fossil fuels produces air pollution as well as heat-trapping gases. And that air pollution is responsible for 10 million premature deaths around the world every year. So in our transition to clean energy, in our transition to a more efficient way to use our energy, we are also immediately saving lives. Investing in clean energy can also increase energy accessibility for communities who don't have access to it. Building climate resilience looks especially to those neighborhoods where people are already vulnerable, where people already don't have the resources to cope with heat waves and floods. So there are many benefits today to our own lives, to our cities, to our businesses, to our economy in building climate resilience, but there are also benefits for climate tomorrow. And when we talk about those benefits, that's when people see the opportunities in change. And I don't think we talk about the possibility of that better future nearly enough.
Catherine, it's great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Catherine Hayhoe is a Canadian climate scientist and professor in the Department of Political Science at Texas Tech University. She's also the chief scientist for Nature United.